Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin. The sterile scent of antiseptic hit me as soon as I stepped into the hospital. I hadn't set foot in this town in 15 years, but everything about it felt so familiar. Too familiar. The dingy waiting room, the too bright lights, the nervous energy from my family. They all looked the same, older, but still holding on to their tight, suffocating expectations. Justin was pacing back and forth, eyes wide, hand rubbing the back of his neck. His face was a picture of stress, the kind that came from too many late nights and too little sleep. Aunt Rochelle spotted me first. Her face twisted into something between surprise and judgment. Then she smirked. "Still working at that car wash." I shrugged, not bothering with the comeback. It was easier that way. My life wasn't a conversation piece I wanted to get into, especially not with them. Plain clothes, quiet demeanor, just like always. Watching the exits, Mom was next. Her sigh carried through the air, a mix of disappointment and something deeper. Concern, maybe. She looked me over, eyes soft, then her mouth formed the words I had heard too many times. "Maybe this is a wake-up call for you to finally grow up." I couldn't tell if I was more annoyed or relieved. Either way, it didn't matter. I was here because of Dad, not them. I found a seat against the wall, trying not to look too much like I was still sizing up every exit. The hospital waiting room felt suffocating, full of too many people who knew too much about each other's lives, and apparently, too little about mine. Justin was still pacing, only now he was muttering under his breath, probably trying to force down his own frustration with Dad's surgery, or maybe with everything else. Caleb, my corporate lawyer cousin, shot me a brief, careful glance before joining in with that practiced charm of his. "So," Caleb said, hands shoved in his pockets, his voice all smooth edges and smiles. "What have you been up to? Still in car washes?" He made air quotes, like the words tasted bad coming out. I shrugged again, keeping my face neutral. It was easier. Before I could respond, Justin spoke up. "You know, it's not about the job, right? It's about what you could have done, what you could be." His words were sharp, almost angry, but mostly just disappointed. You could have been something. Hell, I got out. Got my license. Built something. I wanted to tell him, remind him about that time I'd been sleeping on his couch for months after I wrecked my back in that private security certification class. How the only thing I had left was pain, physical and mental. The training mishap had wrecked my back and any chance at the career I thought I was building. But I didn't bother. They'd never get it. Caleb added with that slick smile, "Yeah, you always had so much potential." Everyone saw it, just never did anything with it. I was used to their digs, I didn't even flinch, but it still stung. Aunt Rochelle had found her target too. She was leaning in toward the others now, her voice a little too loud, a little too deliberate. "That haircuts. Well, let's just say it's not doing you any favors, sweetie. And those clothes, I mean, the cheap stuff, really." I bit my tongue. Let her talk. Let them all talk. The way they whispered and jabbed about me like I was a failure to be analyzed. No one ever asked what was really going on. They just wanted to project their expectations onto me, hoping I'd reflect back the life they imagined I should have had. I glanced at my phone. A text alert buzzed, but I ignored it. There was no point in responding right now. The universe wasn't in any hurry. Not while I was here, dealing with these experts in failure. Beth, my cousin on the other side of the room, couldn't resist another whisper. I mean, honestly, who still cuts their own hair like that? You'd think you'd at least clean yourself up for this. She tacked on a laugh, like she was sharing some big secret. Like the joke was on me. The irony of it hit me in a sharp, sudden flash. I could have told them about the work I was doing, about the real life I built under other names. I could have pulled out my ID, shown them how my world wasn't just about scrubbing car windows and wiping down leather seats. But I wasn't here to set them straight. I wasn't here to prove anything. They would never see it. They would never understand. My phone buzzed again, louder this time, but I still didn't check it. This wasn't the time. So I sat there trying to tune them out, trying to forget that this was my family, trying to pretend I didn't care that they were judging me like they had a damn clue. And I stayed quiet. Because that's all I could do. I could still hear their voices behind me, low whispers, just loud enough to hit that sweet spot where I could catch every word. But none of it mattered. They had their opinions, their assumptions, and I was never going to be the person they wanted me to be. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I had lived 100 different lives over the last decade. Every new job, every new name, every new identity was just part of the game. In the past 10 years, I'd infiltrated boardrooms and corporate offices as someone else, someone who could slip under the radar. A janitor in a financial firm, a secretary at a tech startup, even a barista at a chain cafe where I overheard more than I cared to. Whatever it took to be close enough to the chaos without anyone noticing. My real employer wasn't some small-time business. It was a global crisis recovery firm, one that worked in the shadows, making sure billion-dollar companies didn't crash and burn, all while preventing internal sabotage or fraud. They brought me in for everything: data leaks, employee misconduct, embezzlement schemes. I'd stopped company collapses before they even hit the news, but none of it mattered. None of it would ever matter to them. To them, I was still the dropout who'd failed at everything, the kid who couldn't find his way. I ran my fingers over the edge of my phone, lost in a memory. I had posed as an office temp once in a tech company that was bleeding millions from inside. All it took was a few weeks of cleaning up coffee spills and answering phones, and I had a name. I'd uncovered a massive embezzlement ring operating right under their noses. That investigation had made headlines, but only for the firm I worked for, never for me. The satisfaction of catching the people behind it, though, was always enough. A buzz from my phone pulled me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. A new message. Director Langley, need immediate debrief. Argentina client has vanished. The words hit me like a punch. My stomach turned. I'd been expecting something like this. When the client had vanished, it was never a small issue. The job wasn't done until the fires were out, and I had a lot of work ahead of me. But I was still stuck here, surrounded by a family who saw me as nothing more than the disappointment I'd been years ago. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, not wanting to deal with it. Not right now. Not with my dad's life hanging in the balance. But the pressure was already starting to build, and the buzzing in my pocket wasn't going to stop. I tried to ignore it. I had learned long ago how to compartmentalize, to put everything on hold when it didn't matter. But there was always a moment when the urgency couldn't be avoided. I let out a breath, leaned back, and closed my eyes for just a second. If only they knew what it was really like, the constant juggling of lives, the facades I'd created, the risks I'd taken. They didn't see me as a strategist, as someone who could walk into a room and spot the danger before anyone else even noticed. They didn't see any of that. They saw a car wash worker in cheap clothes with a bad haircut. I could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down, but it didn't faze me. I'd been carrying the weight of their judgment for so long. It was like background noise. What mattered now was the message I had to ignore for the time being. Argentina was waiting, and whatever was going on there wasn't going to fix itself. I shifted in my seat, trying to stay still while the conversation around me grew heavier. Justin, still pacing, stopped for a moment to look at me, his eyes narrow, like he was searching for something in me he couldn't find. "You still chasing that dream of making a difference?" he asked, voice dripping with that mix of condescension and frustration. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. It wasn't the first time I'd heard it, and it wouldn't be the last. Aunt Rochelle, of course, couldn't keep quiet. She leaned in, practically sneering. "Some people invent stories because they can't face who they really are." Her words weren't sharp enough to hurt. They were just the same old, tired insults wrapped in a thin layer of pity. Like she saw me as a failure pretending to be something else. I didn't give her the satisfaction of responding. I'd learned years ago how to keep my face blank, calm. It was how I survived the kind of work I did, how I survived them. Years of training, of pretending to be someone I wasn't, had taught me that my emotions could never be a weakness. Caleb, ever the overachiever, chimed in then. His smile was all polished and perfect. "Hey, maybe you should come work with me." He shrugged like it was nothing. "Just a simple clerical job to get you back on your feet. A little structure could do you good." I suppressed the urge to laugh. A clerical job? Sure, that was exactly what I needed, but I wasn't here to start a fight. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "Thanks, Caleb. I'll think about it." The words felt thin, but it was the polite thing to say. The truth was, I didn't need his help. I'd been in enough high-level boardrooms and corporate meetings to know I was operating on a completely different level than he was. He'd never seen the kind of work I did, the kinds of deals I handled. Another buzz from my phone. I glanced down at the screen, the name flashing up. Langley. My pulse quickened. I ignored everything around me and unlocked the screen. The message was blunt and it sent a spike of adrenaline through me. Langley, need eyes in Buenos Aires, couldn't reach Troy. This is urgent. My stomach twisted. I could feel the weight of the request on me, pulling me in. Buenos Aires was no small deal. If Troy was out of the loop, it meant something had gone seriously wrong. Langley needed someone with the connections to get eyes on the ground fast. Someone who could find the cracks before they shattered everything. I pushed the phone back into my pocket, my focus narrowing. There was no time for this. No time to deal with my family, to explain the life I'd built, but they didn't see any of that. They just kept on talking, kept on throwing jabs and offering their empty solutions. Moments like this, I wondered if I'd ever be able to tell them about all the work I'd done, the people I'd saved, the millions I'd helped prevent from going down the drain, how I'd lived in the shadows, an invisible force that no one ever noticed, except the companies I'd helped survive. But no, they'd never understand. Not in this moment. Maybe never. I glanced at Justin, his eyes still fixed on me, waiting for some kind of reaction. For me to break, to defend myself, to explain. But I just sat there, silent, hands clenched. They wanted a version of me that didn't exist anymore. The version that thought the world was black and white, that believed in dreams that could come true with enough hard work. That version was gone. The only thing left was the person I'd become. Invisible, strategic, and dangerous when I needed to be. I could feel my phone buzz again, but I didn't check it this time. My mind was already elsewhere, in Buenos Aires, tracking down the mess that was unraveling there. And for the first time, I didn't care what they thought of me. Not anymore. They were never going to see me, but I didn't need them to. The surgeon finally stepped into the waiting room, his face less tense than it had been before. A wave of relief rippled through the family, though it still didn't fully hit me. I didn't let myself feel anything until I had more than just a few words. "He made it," the surgeon said, and the words felt heavy, like they'd been stuck in his throat for a while. "He's stable," but it was close. "We'll be monitoring him closely for the next 48 hours, but for now, he's out of the woods." The air in the room shifted. The tension started to bleed off. It was like we could all take that first real breath in hours. We were invited into Dad's room, and I followed the family down the sterile corridor, feeling the weight of every step. Inside, Dad was hooked up to a dozen machines, each beep and hiss telling the story of how close he had come to losing his battle. His face was pale, thinner than I remembered, but his eyes, they still had that same sharp, calculating gleam. Even in a hospital bed, he was still looking for weaknesses. He saw me first. "Good to see you, kid." His voice was raspy but firm. "I guess I won't be needing you to wash cars for a while, huh?" His attempt at humor didn't land quite right. It never did. I didn't smile. I just nodded. "Maybe you should think about settling down," he added, his gaze dropping briefly to the machines keeping him alive, then back to me. "Get a solid job. Retail. Something steady." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten, the same tired advice he'd been giving me for years, as though settling down was the cure for whatever he thought I lacked. Before I could respond, Justin leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his mouth twisted in a smirk. "Maybe she could get a job at Walmart. Keep it simple, you know." The joke fell flat, and I kept my face neutral. I didn't have it in me to respond, not with Dad lying there, still recovering, and not with everything else weighing on me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it for the moment. Dad's eyes scanned the room for a second, sharp as ever, picking up on the tension I wasn't showing. His gaze flicked from me to Justin, then back to me. "You know, you never got it together, kid. Maybe now's the time." I stayed silent, my expression frozen. The old man could dish out advice, but he never seemed to notice how much of it was based on assumptions about who I was, about what he thought I should be. Another buzz from my phone. This time, I couldn't ignore it. The name on the screen made my stomach tighten. Langley. I glanced at it quickly, just long enough to see the message pop up. Missing client confirmed. PR nightmare imminent. My heart skipped a beat. Buenos Aires was in full meltdown mode. Whatever was happening down there, it wasn't going to wait. The pressure built in my chest, but I kept my face blank. Dad was still talking, but I wasn't listening anymore. His words were drowned out by the rush of adrenaline, the gnawing sense of urgency clawing at the edges of my thoughts. I shoved the phone back in my pocket, pushing the world outside of this room to the back of my mind for now. There'd be time to handle the disaster waiting for me. But not yet. Not while Dad was still here, alive. Get some rest, Dad, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I reached for his hand, the coldness of his skin a reminder of how close we'd come to losing him. He gave me a thin smile, but I could tell he wasn't going to let up. You'll think about what I said, right? He asked, his eyes glinting with that old expectation. I nodded again, not trusting myself to speak. It didn't matter what I said. Not right now. Because the world outside this room was still spinning, and sooner or later, I would have to walk back into it. Dad was still talking, his voice steady but insistent. You need to stop running, kid. It's time to face reality. You've never had the guts to stick with anything. You could settle down, find something stable, maybe get your life on track, do something responsible for once. His gaze was sharp but tired. He was trying to hammer home the same point, like he'd been doing for years. It's not too late to fix it. I felt the heat rising in my chest, but I didn't say anything. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. It was always the same with him, like I was some unfinished project he was trying to force into his mold. I needed air. I needed space. I stood up abruptly, brushing past Justin, who looked up but didn't say anything. I stepped out of the room into the sterile hospital corridor, my feet moving on autopilot. My phone buzzed again. I didn't have to look to know it was Langley. I had a feeling this time it was urgent. The moment I hit the hallway, I pulled the phone out of my pocket, swiping the screen. Langley, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, but I could hear the tightness in his tone already. You're the only one with access to the rogue exec's files. The press got wind of it, and shareholders are panicking. Langley's voice crackled with tension. We need you back in New York in 3 hours. Can you do that? My stomach dropped. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this kind of urgency, this much weight. If this got out, it wasn't just a PR nightmare. It could bring down everything. Langley was right. I was the only one who had what they needed. I glanced over my shoulder through the glass window. I could see my family still gathered around Dad's bed. Justin was talking, probably telling Dad about his latest design project, while Aunt Rochelle hovered nearby, watching me like a hawk. They'd probably assume I was just running off again. They never understood. I should let them think I was nothing. Let them think I flaked out again, that I was still stuck in some dead-end job. It would be easier. But the moment stretched on, and I felt the pressure building in my chest again. This wasn't just about me. It wasn't about their opinions anymore. I couldn't walk away from this. I took a breath, and then, without thinking too hard, I turned back toward the door, my hand on the knob. I walked back into the room, my voice steady but louder than before. I have to go. Justin, looking up from his phone, snorted. Of course you do. Got a hot oil change to get to? He raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. The words stung, but I didn't let it show. I could feel the tension between us building again, the same damn pattern. He still saw me as the screw-up, the one who never got it together, who always had an excuse. I didn't rise to it. Instead, I took a step closer to the bed, my eyes fixed on Dad. He was watching me with that look, half concerned, half disappointed. But I didn't let it affect me. I'll be back soon, I said, keeping my voice even. You don't have to go, he said softly, his eyes searching mine like he was looking for the answer to some unspoken question. You can stay. You always run when things get hard, but you can stay this time. The urge to snap was there, to shout that I wasn't running, but it felt pointless. I just nodded, tight-lipped. I'll come back when I'm done. I turned to walk out, feeling every step in my bones. Justin didn't say anything else, but I felt his eyes on me as I moved toward the door. This wasn't about their approval. It never had been. The door clicked shut behind me, and I forced my pace to stay steady as I headed back toward the elevator. I stepped toward the door, but before I could leave, Mom's voice stopped me. Where are you going? Her tone was soft, like she wasn't sure if she wanted an answer, like she didn't really want to know. I turned back, meeting her eyes. New York. Caleb, standing next to her, let out a short laugh, his eyes flicking between me and the door like he was trying to piece it together. What's in New York? Another failed job interview. I didn't even flinch. The words were old, tired, but the sting was there, buried deep, like it always was when Caleb opened his mouth. He thought he knew me, thought he had me figured out. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my company phone, the secure one, the one that no one in this room had ever seen before. The caller ID flashed on the screen, Langley, Ops Command. I held it up, not bothering to hide the slight edge in my voice. Actually, I said, I work for a firm that handles corporate disasters before they hit the headlines. The room fell dead silent, the kind of quiet that felt thick with disbelief, like everyone was processing what I'd said, trying to connect the dots between the person they thought they knew and the words that just came out of my mouth. I took another step toward them, my hand steady as I pulled out my ID Senior Field Strategist, Oracle Risk Solutions. I let it hang there in the air for a moment, watching as their eyes scanned the words. Caleb blinked, then looked back at me, his expression shifting from confusion to something close to stunned. Justin looked between the two of us, still not quite believing what was happening. Oracle Risk Solutions, Mom repeated, the words tasting strange in her mouth. I nodded. You think I work at a car wash? That was deep cover. I was investigating internal fraud and laundering tied to a cartel. The words left my mouth like a confession, but it felt more like a release, like I'd been holding this back for years, pretending to be something I wasn't, for their sake. Dad, still lying in the bed, blinked slowly, trying to process what I'd said. His face was a study in disbelief, a mixture of confusion and something like regret. This can't be real. It hit me then, just how far I had gone to keep them all in the dark. How much I had let them believe that I was nothing more than a disappointment. I'd done it because it was easier than explaining a life that didn't fit their expectations. But now, standing here in front of them, I realized how deep the lies went. Not just mine, but theirs too. The idea that I was a failure was as much their story as it was mine. You've been lying all these years, Justin said, the accusation in his voice sharp. But there was something else there too. Hurt, maybe. I met his eyes, not backing down. I never lied. I just didn't tell you everything. There was a pause, long enough for the weight of the words to settle between us. Caleb cleared his throat, like he was trying to regain control of the room, but the shock was still written across his face. So, all this time you've been, what? Saving companies, undercover. His voice was a mix of awe and disbelief. I nodded, feeling the tension in the room rise like a storm. I've done more in the past few years than any of you will ever know. I let my words land, letting them sink into the air, and I've done it without you ever knowing who I really was. The silence stretched. I could feel their eyes on me, like they were seeing me for the first time. Caleb finally spoke again, his voice quieter, more careful. Why didn't you tell us? Why keep it all a secret? I looked at my dad, who still wasn't speaking, still just watching me with those eyes that had never stopped judging. Because if I told you, you would have put me in a box, like you always do. You'd have asked me to explain, to justify every decision, and you couldn't handle it? Mom swallowed hard, her face pale. So, all those years, you were working for some secret company, doing who knows what, and we had no idea. I nodded again. Exactly, because none of you could ever see past the person you wanted me to be. I felt the walls in the room closing in as the truth hung in the air like smoke. The family I'd tried so hard to please, tried to make proud, suddenly looked like strangers. And the worst part was, they didn't get it. They never would. Dad finally spoke, his voice hoarse. I didn't raise you to live like this. I didn't respond. What was there to say? There was no turning back now. Justin cleared his throat, still clearly processing everything. But why not come back? Why not tell us what you were doing? You could have had a normal life, a real job. I shook my head. You never understood the kind of work I do. And maybe it's better that way. For a moment, there was only the sound of the machines beeping in the background, a reminder of how fragile everything was. Then, in the quiet, Dad's voice broke through again, softer now. You're my daughter. I don't know what to think, but I didn't know. I didn't know any of this. I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. I had never needed their approval. But now, for the first time, I realized I didn't need their understanding either. The silence in the room stretched out longer than I could stand. Mom stared at me, her eyes wide. But there was something else there, something that made me feel like she didn't recognize me anymore. It hit me all at once. I was a stranger to her now. A ghost, a person who had lived in the shadows so long, she couldn't even find the shape of me in the light. Justin, his mouth half open like he was about to say something, closed it again. His face was flushed, his eyes darting around the room like he didn't know what to do with all the pieces he was trying to fit together. His silence was louder than anything he could have said. Caleb was the one to break it, his voice so quiet I almost didn't catch it. That company, they're in the news. You're that woman." His words hung there, jagged with disbelief. I nodded. Just once, no need to say more. They had to know by now. The company I worked for, Oracle Risk Solutions, wasn't a secret, not anymore. But what I had done, the world was starting to catch up. Mom's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, her voice wavered. "Why didn't you tell us, any of us?" The words were almost a plea, like she needed some answer she could hold on to. I exhaled slowly, pushing away the frustration that burned low in my chest. Because if I had told you, you would have wanted to know everything. You would have wanted to be a part of it. You wouldn't have understood the risks, the NDAS, the people I was dealing with. You think I was just playing it safe? But I wasn't. Every time I saw you, I had to pretend to be nothing. Because if anyone knew who I really was, we'd all be in danger. My voice was calm, but it shook a little at the end, and I hated myself for it. I didn't look at Dad. I didn't want to see the disappointment, the way he would close off to me again. I couldn't handle it right now, not with everything else crashing down around me, but it was like I could feel Mom's heart breaking from across the room. She wasn't angry, she was just lost. She didn't know who I was anymore, and I didn't know if I could bring her back. Caleb was the next one to speak, his voice barely audible. "You never let us in. Not even a hint of the truth. All this time, we thought you were just a screw-up. And now we find out you've been saving the world, or whatever the hell it is you've been doing, and we were left out of it." He shook his head, visibly pale now. "You're really that woman, aren't you?" The air felt thin, like there wasn't enough space for all the things left unsaid. I stood still, letting it settle. "I am," I said, voice tight. "And that's why I couldn't tell you." I didn't want to explain how I'd fought back against billion-dollar corporations, the ones that would have crushed me if they knew who I really was. I didn't want to say how I'd been shadowing high-level execs, listening to their schemes, helping companies avoid collapse while staying invisible. I didn't owe them that much. And then, right in the middle of this quiet storm, my phone buzzed again. The instant I saw Langley's name, I felt the world shift. I pulled it out without hesitation, already knowing what it was about. "Langley," I answered, my voice back in business mode, all emotion pushed down. "What's the situation?" The tension was clear in his voice. "We've got eyes on the missing exec. We can't waste any more time. The press is about to explode and shareholders are getting desperate. I need you airborne in 2 hours. Send the files to the secure drop. We're not letting this go public." My heart kicked into high gear. This wasn't just another project. This was high stakes, and it had crashed into my life in the middle of everything else. "Copy," I said. "I'm airborne in 2 hours. Send the files to the drop." Langley's voice shifted slightly, quieter now. "Ann Gallagher. We've got eyes on the rogue exec. Bring the heat." The words hit like a slap. If I didn't move now, we'd lose the lead. I ended the call and shoved the phone back in my pocket, ignoring the sound of my family still trying to process everything. My pulse was racing, my body already slipping into work mode, the familiar focus taking over. I was done pretending. There was no more room for me to be nothing. I looked at them one last time before turning toward the door. "I have to go," I said, my voice flat but steady. Justin's eyes narrowed, his tone biting again. "Of course you do. Gotta save the world again." I didn't answer. Didn't have to. I could feel their eyes on me as I stepped out, but I didn't look back. I hadn't made it halfway to the door when I felt a hand on my arm. It was Dad. His fingers were cold against my skin, but there was no mistaking the way he gripped me. Strong, urgent. His voice came low, almost a whisper, like he was afraid someone would hear. "I was wrong. I thought you were lost." I didn't say anything right away. I couldn't. His words hit deeper than anything else he'd ever said to me. I stared at him, watching his face, seeing how his expression had softened, maybe for the first time in my life. His eyes still sharp but now holding something else, maybe regret, maybe understanding. "I wasn't lost," I said finally, my voice steady but with an edge. "I was just invisible." Because that's what the job needed. There it was, the truth, laid out like a map they never bothered to read. But they wouldn't, have understood. And maybe that was part of the reason I stayed away. He squeezed my hand tighter for a second, then let go, nodding slowly. I turned my head and saw the rest of the family watching, their faces a mix of confusion and something else I couldn't name. I didn't have time for explanations. I couldn't make them see me now, not when there was so much more at stake. As I grabbed my bag, I heard my phone buzz again. I didn't check it. I couldn't let myself get distracted. But I was still standing there, still processing the weight of Dad's words, when my phone buzzed again. This time a text. From Justin. I didn't look at it immediately, but I could feel my chest tighten as I set the strap over my shoulder. I pulled it out, and there it was. Justin, you're incredible. I didn't know. I'm sorry. It wasn't much, but it was enough to stop me for a moment, right there in the doorway. The apology was quiet, maybe even clumsy, but it was there. And for the first time, it felt like he saw me. Not the screw-up, not the disappointment. I didn't respond. I couldn't. As I packed the last of my things into my bag, Caleb's voice rang out, calm but with that faint edge of hesitation. Hey, he said, standing near the door like he wasn't sure if he should be in the way. If you need help with anything, let me know. Legal reviews, cases, whatever. I mean it. I looked up at him, and for a moment his face wasn't filled with judgment anymore. It was open, almost genuine. His offer hung there, but I just nodded. Thanks, Caleb. There was no need for anything more. Not now. Then, as I stood up to leave, Mom was suddenly there. She wrapped her arms around me, tentative at first, like she wasn't sure if she had the right. I froze for a second, the weight of the gesture hitting me harder than I expected. When she pulled back, her eyes were shiny, but she didn't wipe away the tears. Instead, she just said quietly, "Come back when this is over. We'll be better." I couldn't tell if that was a promise or a plea, but I didn't have time to break it down. My heart thudded in my chest, heavy and full of something I couldn't name, but I gave her a small nod. That was all I could give her. I walked out, not looking back. I didn't owe anyone an explanation anymore. The company jet was waiting. It wasn't anything fancy, no government grade level here, but it was close enough. Close enough for a job that kept me invisible, that kept me moving, that kept me necessary. As the engines roared to life, I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes just for a second, letting the hum of the plane drown everything else out. I didn't look back at the house, at the family I had just left behind. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, I finally understood. I wasn't running anymore. I was just doing what I had to do, and maybe that was enough. The plane landed with the smooth precision I was used to, but there was no time to relax. I grabbed my bag and made my way through the airport like I'd done 100 times before. No hesitation, no distractions. The world outside could keep spinning, but my focus was laser sharp now. I took a cab straight to Oracle HQ. The familiar scent of coffee and fluorescent lights hit me as I entered the building, the hum of activity filling the air. The crisis room was alive with tension, screens flashing, people typing, papers shuffling. Everything was urgent, everything was falling apart. But this was where I belonged. Langley was already there, his eyes scanning the room as if he could smell the chaos. He looked up as I walked in, his expression hard but welcoming in its own way. The exec wired $42 million to an offshore shell 36 hours ago, Langley said, getting right to it. His voice was tight, clipped. We've got 48 hours before the media breaks it. We can't afford to waste any time. I took the files from him without hesitation, feeling the weight of them in my hands. The contents were no surprise to me, just another layer of a web I'd been untangling in silence for far too long. I know where he's hiding, I said, my voice low and controlled. And I know who helped him. Langley's eyes met mine, sharp and assessing. You ready to bring the fire? He asked, and there was something in his voice that told me he knew I was the one who could get it done. He wasn't asking for promises, he was asking if I was ready. I didn't need to think about it. Always, I said, like it was the only answer I'd ever given. As Langley moved toward the screen to pull up the latest intel, my eyes drifted around the room. The walls were lined with monitors and live feeds, the pace frenetic, like a well-oiled machine. But in the corner of the room, there was a framed headline I couldn't ignore. Whistleblower saves Fortune 500 giant from collapse. The picture was faded, the words just a little worn, but I knew exactly what it meant. It was from a case I cracked last year, one that had made waves in the corporate world, but never reached the people who mattered most. The small smile that tugged at my lips wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't pride, it was something else. Peace. Finally. For the first time in 15 years, I knew they saw me now. They didn't need to hear the whole story, didn't need to know the details. They understood what I could do, what I had been doing, and for the first time, I didn't need to explain myself. I turned my attention back to Langley as he began briefing the team, feeling that familiar calm settling over me. This was my world, and no matter what my family thought, I was exactly where I needed to be.